Today I'm going to show you how to make a tube rivet. I've got a cheat sheet that I've made with different size holes that correspond with different size drill bits. I'm going to be riveting a 14 gauge silver tube on my two pieces of scrap metal. So I want to make sure that I get the correct drill bit that corresponds with a 14 gauge sized hole. I want my tubing to fit in the hole very snugly. So I've got my drill bit in place, making sure that it's straight before I begin. Now I'm going to take my scrap pieces of metal. Today I'm using scrap. If this was for a project, I definitely need to make sure I know exactly where my hole is going to go. I'm going to take my awl and a hammer and hammer the dent onto my metal, and you'll notice I'm using it on a steel plate. I'm going to take my second piece of metal and dent this one as well with the awl. So now both pieces of metal have the dents where I want the holes to go. Take my wood, make sure it's back under the press. Then I'm going to line up my metal, making sure I wear my goggles. Now again, I'm going to line up the drill bit over my dent, start my press, turn it on all the way, and drill my holes through the dent. Turn it off and do my second piece of metal. I notice that after I drill, the back of the hole is always a little bit jagged. I'll be sure to clean that up, sanding either by hand or using the flex shaft to make sure that my metal is very smooth and sanded to the grit that I want before I make the rivet. So I've got both pieces with holes in it. Now I'm going to take them to the flex shaft to finish sanding. I've got a V-block set up in my studio, and here's my 14 gauge sterling silver wire. You notice it's tubing, and the tube is hollow, so I can't use the scissors to cut it because then that'll close the end of the hole. So I'm going to put the tubing through both pieces of metal, and while it's through the metal, I'm going to use my jeweler's saw and my V-block to cut the length of tubing that I need. I'll cut it slightly longer, and I can file away the extra. Let's talk about how long we're going to make the tube rivet. When making a rivet, I'm going to draw an illustration here. I'm looking at my two pieces of metal from the side, obviously zoomed in, and they both have a hole drilled in it, and here they are lined up. The length of tubing or wire that I want sticking out of the end of my metal is about the width of one piece of metal. So essentially I've got the width times 4 is the length of tubing or wire that I want. So again, I've got the tubing through my metal, both pieces, and I take my jeweler's saw and I'm going to cut. This is probably the hardest part in the whole process, is sawing this thin wire. So here we go, I've got my wire, it's through both pieces of metal, and now I'm going to file it. Again, this is tubing, so there's a slightly different part of the process than making a wire rivet. Right now I'm filing it flat like I would with a wire rivet. I'm going to file both ends flat on a steel plate. And again, it's easiest to cut your tubing while it's through the holes of the metal. And then keeping it in the holes of the metal, I'm going to file it. So both ends are flat, trying to get them flat and the right length of wire that I need. Once I'm done filing and both sides are flat, I'm going to take an awl and put it in one end of the silver tubing. Notice I'm moving it around. I'm trying to slowly stretch the rim of the hole for the tube. Flip my metal over and I try to get on the other side. With the awl, move it in a circle and slowly begin to stretch the outside edge. I can take a hammer and hammer it in a little bit too, into the end of the wire, the tubing, so it starts to stretch that end of the hole. Once I've stretched the hole, I'm going to take the ball end of my ball peen hammer, and now the process is the same as a wire rivet. I'm hammering one side and slowly beginning to stretch and flatten the ends of my wire. Hammering straight up and down. Now again, if my tubing is too long, or if my wire for a rivet is too long, it'll curl over, bend over, kind of look like a candy cane. So I've got to make sure I've got the right length of wire or tubing. Once I've made the ends stretch out a little bit, I'm going to take the flat end of my ball peen hammer, and now I'm flattening the ends of the tubing to complete my rivet. A tube rivet can be decoration as well as functional. Looks very nice with the silver rim of the tube. And again, just like a wire rivet, if the ends are a little bit jagged, you can certainly take it to the flex shaft or sand it by hand.